Hello and welcome again to Baseline Exchanges, the podcast from Baseline Media, which adds colour and context to the stories from the tennis world. It's tennis, but viewed differently. Hello, I'm Andrew Rayburn. I'll be introducing our special guest for this week in just a moment. But first, joining me as ever in the presenter's friend chair is Baseline Media's very own Editor-in-Chief, Craig Viner. Craig, welcome back to Baseline Exchanges.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me again. How are you?
Always a pleasure. I'm very well. Yourself, sir?
Good. Very good. Thank you. Looking forward to this as always.
Yeah, this should be a good one. Just a reminder before we start, the podcast accompanies our Baseline Media videos, which can be seen on our YouTube channel. Just search Baseline Tennis. Our vivid storytelling has so far focused on the likes of Arthur Ashe, Roger Federer, Ivan Lendl, Sania Mirza, Ashley Barty, and wheelchair tennis legend Esther Fakir. Recently, we've focused on Novak Djokovic's incredible mentality, asked if Nick Kyrgios is a character misunderstood, and turned the clock back to 2009 and that epic Australian Open final between Rafa and Roger. So do go onto our YouTube channel, Baseline Tennis, and check all of those videos out.
You're listening to Baseline Exchanges from Baseline Media.
Now, with us today is tennis analyst and strategist, either way, Mike James. You can probably pronounce it both ways. Mike is also the founder and company director of Sportiii Analytics, whose company slogan is developing players through data-driven tennis analytics. It's a big topic, of course, in the modern game. In the past, Mike has worked with several top 100 ATP and WTA players and coaches, including Magnus Norman and Stan Wawrinka towards the end of the 2018 season and the start of 2019. Currently, he's working closely with the young Serbian star and next-genner Misha Kekmanovic, who won his maiden ATP title in Kitzbühel last year. Mike also continues to support several players during the off-season, creating player reports to help teams be better prepared for the upcoming year. That's his CV. His name's Mike James. He's here with us. Welcome to Baseline Exchanges, Mike.
Guys, thank you for having me. What an introduction. I've been following the YouTube channel and social media closely, and I've enjoyed the podcast to date. So hopefully this is going to be another good one.
There you go. See, that's all the we'll stick that on all the posters, I think, as the key recommendation, Mike. Thank you very much. Now, Mike, it's great to have you on. Now, we went through your little bio there, and we started with the words tennis analyst and strategist, whatever. Let's strip it back to basics. What is a tennis analyst, first of all, and how does that differ from being a tennis strategist?
That's a great question. And actually, the labels that you put on that, other people tend to label me in different ways. So data analyst, performance analyst, strategy coach. The reason I would say tennis analyst or strategy coach is because I've not come from a performance analysis background. I started off as a tennis coach, and my journey has sort of brought me into this area where I'm working with top 100 players, ATP, WTA, around the data and the video side, and that's because I like technology, basically.
Well, in that case, let's wind it back even further then. Tell us about your coaching experience then, first of all, and how it sort of morphed into where you are now.
Great word, morphed. I like that one. So I've been coaching, I'm a licensed tennis coach for 18 years. And my journey, really, I describe it as from tots to tall. So I started really at the bottom rung of the tennis ladder, didn't come from a privileged playing background. That's a nice way of saying I wasn't very good. And went into tennis coaching pretty early after my A-levels, and worked my way through as a development coach, head coach at a few different clubs. Went into performance coaching around 2008, 2009, worked for several academies, coached abroad in Italy, Germany, America. But really, I would say my career changed, and I would recommend any tennis coach out there listening to this when I decided to look for a mentor, really, somebody that I wanted to look up to, learn from, and help me get to where I wanted to go. And that person for me would be Claudio Pistolesi. And I met Claudio Pistolesi in 2010 when I was head of performance at Derbyshire Tennis Centre. And, you know, he was the first tour big name coach that took a chance on me to allow me to pester him, to follow him and travel and learn off him. So I learned off him in Italy, Germany, America. And it was 2015 when he set up his own academy and franchise, Claudio Pistolesi Enterprise, that he asked me to come and work with him. So that was a dream come true for me. When I started to then transition into the Pro Tour in 2015 and work with players anything between 1,000 and 200 in the world, the thing that was missing from my end is when I was around all these top tour coaches that could talk about when they played third round US Open against Jimmy Connors in Arthur Ashe Stadium, I didn't have that link, but I was always interested in technology and video analysis. So started traveling on the tour with using Dartfish, coding the matches at a very basic level, but actually starting to present facts with the players in the hotel room. And for any coach that's traveled with a player, junior or senior, you realize that on a match day, there's a lot of downtime after the match, particularly if they lose. You know, you maybe take a day off after, and then there's maybe another week before the next match. There's a lot of downtime that I felt that I could be utilizing more. And the way I did that was with video and analytics with the players I was working with Claudio.
I think that's really interesting that you obviously saw a bit of a gap and you sort of wanted to brand yourself slightly differently, and you thought, how can I get ahead of the game? And you basically exploited an area that was up and coming and gave you a new weapon in your arsenal. You mentioned Dartfish software. Can you just talk a little bit about that for those that don't know anything about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, out there, performance analysis software, there's a few different brands. I don't work for Dartfish or endorsing them. I'm not getting any money from that. But effectively what Dartfish did in around 2009, 2010, they created a blank tagging or coding panel for multiple sports. So effectively the analyst or the person that's using the software can custom make that software relevant to what they're working with. So it's covered across multiple Olympic sports. But in tennis, what was great about it is you could set up a panel that could be extremely basic with statistics. So, you know, you code maybe errors, winners, you know, very basic stuff like that to what we're doing today, which we're coding over 30 key performance indicators with the pro guys, where we're looking at 4 different serve zones, 9 different return zones. So you can basically tailor make the software. And that's something that from my coaching career, learning from Claudio, his big emphasis was on tailor-made coaching. And then I thought, well, when I bring the analytics into the coaching world, I really want to keep that philosophy, which is effectively being tailor-made. And even now when we're working with players, we'll adapt our tagging panels to the player and to the coach sometimes, because sometimes, let's say we're coding 30 key performance indicators, the tour coach or player might go, well, we only want 10 that we're really focusing on. So can you just hit us with those numbs, basically?
You mentioned, of course, there Claudio Pistolesi, former coach to Robin Soedling, Daniela Hantakova, among others. So, I mean, you talked about you were learning from him. What sort of areas did filtered into your thinking there?
Well, Claudio is an amazing motivational coach, a great. You know, if I was to liken him to a football coach, I'd say Jose Mourinho. You know, Alex Ferguson. Man management is of course he's a knowledgeable top 100 player, like you say, but really the mental side of the game is his specialism. So when we were teaming up with players, you know, he could give the mental side of the game. You know, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. The way he chooses his words are amazing. So I came in with the video and the data, and we created a really good team mentality with our player base. But what happened for me, I suppose, from the analytics point of view, I was working with the best player ranking wise that we were working with at the time was Ante Pavic, Croatian Davis Cup player, who was around 230 singles at the time. He's moved fully into doubles now, and he's around 105 at the moment. It was at the US Open 2018 that I had a coffee and lunch with Magnus Norman, who was working with Stan Wawrinka at the time. Introductory meeting, we got on great. Exchanged emails and these sort of things. And then a month later, I was coaching in Spain, and I had an email from Magnus titled Stan Wawrinka. And for me, that was very, very interesting, because I was like, okay, I couldn't open it quick enough, literally. And he asked me, you know, would I be interested in doing a bit of research around Stan's game before his knee injury and after his knee injury, because Magnus had been working with Stan for quite some time. They had amazing success, winning 3 Grand Slams, top 5 in the world, Davis Cup. So it was a huge challenge for me to take on. If I'm honest, at the time, I had no idea whether I could deliver something of a level that he would be satisfied with. Me being me, I said yes. I like a challenge, and what's the worst that can happen, so to speak. So maybe it took me 2.5 months, collected over 40 matches before his knee injury, after his knee injury, broke everything down. I was flown to his academy in Stockholm, Sweden, at the Good to Great Tennis Academy, and presented findings on Stan's game, just me and Magnus, in the Wimbledon boardroom in his academy, with Bjorn Borg on the wall with a Wimbledon trophy, Stan in a huge, massive overhead projector, and having a bit of an out-of-body experience, really, in the sense of, I'm delivering to one of the world's best coaches about his player's backhand, who's one of the world's best one-handed backhands ever. So fortunately, Magnus liked what I was about and how I was delivering. And then we continued working together off season 2018 into 2019. And then, at that period, he felt that he'd got Stan's game back on track. He finished the top 20, and we parted ways very amicably. And I'm still in touch with him today and working with his academy. So that was sort of my big break, if you like, in exclamation marks, of set me on this path I'm on today, really.
Can I ask what kind of things that you found from those 40 matches pre and post?
Yeah, I'm happy to give you a couple there, Craig. So his court position had altered a little bit. His return, the type of return he was playing, block versus the drive return, and also where he was aiming the return. And then some of his serve patterns as well had changed. I think if Magnus is listening to this, that will be as much info as he wants me to go into on that. But
he definitely does listen.
So for me, I was really happy that it was a big project to take on one of the world's best players in the last 15 years. And I came out with some great content that, I found useful, even today.
And what I find interesting about that is that obviously we think about analytics in terms of, obviously a coach comes to an analyst and says, can you give me data points on this, that, and the other? But talking about a player pre and post injury or surgery or whatever, and that's quite an interesting area. How often would that come up with analysts? How much of a focus with coaches is there on how players' games have changed, almost if they're trying to find out if the injury or surgery has remodeled them a little bit?
That's a really, really good question, and I think it happens in different ways. So it could actually be a mental situation, that the players may be having some psychological challenges. They're working with a mental trainer, and the mental trainer comes to us and goes, can you give us some data and video content around this period that I can use in my portfolio with the player? It could be a ranking situation where the player has dropped ranking outside the top 100, and they want to know, well, what did the player do when he was at his peak? So it really does change depending on, it's very case specific, if you like. But I like to think what we're doing at Sportiii Analytics and with the team we've got there is we are very holistic. So we are actually trying to be the hub for the player. So whether it's the physical trainer, and utilizing footwork patterns and things like this, whether it's the psychologist, the head coach, the traveling coach, the federation, the Davis Cup captain, it's a multidisciplinary approach nowadays. So we're trying to be the hub for the player in that situation.
I think that's what's great about the Dartfish technology, because you also have the video alongside the data, and just by having that video, it speaks to so many different people on so many different levels, because you've got the visual side of how a player is moving potentially, in the example of Stan, he might be taking less strides to a ball to protect his knee, and then you can count those steps as well as see the outcome of that for the stats. Was that something that you found super useful as well?
I think that's an amazing point, Craig. How we have to look at it is a physical trainer will measure the player's movements, sprint speeds, lifting weights, fatigue. The physical trainer measures all of this. The tennis coach often has measured the player's performance by two things. Do they win or they lose? And is their ranking going up or is it going down? With analytics and tennis data and video support, we can measure the performance in a different way. So, we were working with a few players over the off season, and it's amazing every time. We always find something new that the player and the coach hasn't noticed, positive and negative. And I also think that often when we get the call from an agent or a player or the coach, they want to fix something. What I'm a big believer in is the positive reinforcement side of things, and actually giving them a boost, because obviously the video and the data can really scrutinize the player's game. But actually, yes, we can look at this area, but we want to give, positive reinforcement for what they're doing world class.
I think you mentioned when you obviously went and had that conversation with Magnus at the Good to Great Academy, that there was potentially a little bit of imposter syndrome there, being like, how have I got here? But obviously you've got there on merit. How much of your coaching background and being able to talk from a coaching perspective helped you in that situation?
If I'm honest, I think that's probably one of my USPs, is the fact that the data side, I've developed and built with great analysts, data engineer now we've got on board. So, that side of it, we're really, building all the time. But ultimately, when you're sitting there with a multi-millionaire tennis player, maybe even a Grand Slam winner, big name coach, these sort of people, they want it in layman's terms, and they want it very, very fast and to the point. So, I think my coaching background does help me out. Yeah, obviously as a coach, did pretty well, working at a challenger level, main tour level with players inside 200. So I've got a bit of credibility from tour level there. But also I think it's the empathy and the soft skills that you need as an analyst. I know other analysts that have dealt with top 100 players that their language used has caused them to not get the job, because players can be very sensitive with how you speak. And if you're sitting there showing them video and saying you're not very good at this, there's a couple of different ways to do that. And I know how I try to do that with player support teams. So yeah, great question.
You mentioned at the beginning of kind of one of your first answers about 2008, 2009, when you started to sort of delve into the data side of it. What was the data analytics landscape like at that time? Because we're all very used now, aren't we, to seeing some of the Hawkeye stuff on the media coverage, on the TV coverage, and we're used to seeing data analytics covered in other sports. It's out there for the mainstream now. When did data analytics cross over from the if you pardon the expression, geeks in front of a computer screen on a tennis court or on at a football stadium into the mainstream? And what was it like in 2008 when you kind of delved into it?
I think tennis stats started in 1991, and the big area that changed the game was obviously the use of Hawkeye. Hawkeye allowed multiple different stats that weren't there before to be coming into play. So when Hawkeye came in, I think that was a massive change for the game. I think around 2009, when I started getting involved with data and being interested in it, again, nothing really happening too exciting. I think what the next change was the on-court coaching on the WTA side. Because what happened with the on-court coaching on the WTA side around, I think, 2010, 2011, the coaches could actually look at the live data, go onto the court and speak to the player and give them that information in layman's terms and break it down for them. Now, that for me was a big change. And then fast forward to 2017, the next gen finals, it might have been 2018 actually. It's hard to know and remember which year we're in at the moment, actually, during the pandemic.
Very true,
but,
yeah.
But the next gen finals took it on again with having the iPads on the court with the player and the coach. So the player can interpret the data at the same time the coach can, and they can relay and have those conversations. Now, next gen was cancelled last year. I was gutted because I really wanted to. Misha would have been in the top 8 in the world at under 21, and I would have been there next to the coach, relaying the live information to Miro. So that was a big step forward. So you're talking like a 10-year gap there almost between, Hawkeye coming in and doing a great job, to then on-court coaching, to then the next gen finals. And then it went a stage further last year when at the ATP Cup, they had a strategy room where the whole team could go into a room, like I did at Good to Great, with a big screen, data analysts popping up the information and the whole team chipping in and finding out where they want to go with the data, because that's the thing. It's the interpretation and the insights that we're providing is the skill. The coding and the actual manual tagging part, that will be automated sooner rather than later, and it's becoming more and more automated. But the skill is the interpretation of my first serve percentage is 75%, but I'm winning 55%. Okay, that's really low on the winning percentage. Where are you serving to? What happens when the ball is returned? Where is it returned? Which shot are you playing after that? What's your court position? So there's multiple layers there that you have to go into to give them where do you go with that? I've said 4 or 5 different things there, but I'm not going to give them the 4 or 5 different things. I'm going to give them the one that I feel as an analyst that's going to make the difference to their performance.
And that's obviously where the coaching side comes into it as well, rather than just a stats person. And of course, that is the thing, isn't it, that we see at the on broadcast coverage at the end of every set. You got the tail of the tape, if you like, in terms of first serve percentages and return winners and stuff like that. But that doesn't, you could mark out who's winning in those stats, but that doesn't tell you anything, does it? It's all about context and delving deeper and understanding, almost like the expected goals measurement in football, understanding sort of where those stats fit into the match at any one time, pressure points, where on the court that a player is winning those points in. Just pure data isn't worth it, is it really, in a way?
Absolutely. And I think the other one is we're collecting season data on players. So the more data we have throughout the year, the more accurate we can be with our feedback. And also we have to remember with tennis compared to, say, football, is it's played on different surfaces with different balls and different conditions, altitude, indoor, outdoor, clay, grass, hard. That is a bigger challenge for us in tennis than football, because we can then microcycle, okay, what's this player doing when they're on clay compared to when they're on grass, compared to on the hard? And there are metrics that change. They're not as big as maybe people would think related to the surface, but there are players that are going to be more successful on the grass court this year than on the clay court. So if you're working with a player that's a grass court specialist or can have a run, that's where you want to focus that 4 or 5 weeks of the year, because they could win a big title or most of their prize money for the year could come in that period. So I totally agree.
I think what's also interesting is that obviously you've started it quite organically. You sort of spotted that there was a gap in the market. You had a bit of a breakthrough and we ran with that. And now you founded Sportiii Analytics.
Both, actually.
Funded and founded, yeah. They normally go hand in hand, don't they? So tell me how that came about. Was it a case that only one man can do so many hours in a day, sort of thing, and you needed some help with that, or you saw there was a business opportunity there? But
basically, what happened, Craig, was that when I got the call from Magnus and agreed to work with him for the off season in 2018, he wanted me to keep that confidential and private, which I did all the way until Wimbledon. Which you're talking, 7-8 months. And then I was invited in the players box for Stan's matches at Wimbledon. What happens then when you're in Stan Wawrinka's players box and you're shown on TV? People go, Mike James is in Stan's players box. Why? So then the phone starts ringing and these sort of things. And luckily, or fortunately, after that, I had multiple opportunities to work with different players. And then the light bulb moment of going, well, why not set up a company where I can bring other people involved with different skills and cover multiple players, because I knew the work I was doing with Stan is a lot of man hours, unsociable. The data mining part takes time. So what happens if I get 10 players on the door? Can we facilitate that? So it's effectively, that's how Sportiii was born. Sitting in the players box at Wimbledon and having the phone ring several times, the day after. And if I'm honest, I've really enjoyed the journey at the moment. Obviously, the big problem for us was the tour ending. I set up the company August 2019, and then March 2020, finito, the tour stopped for 7 months. And that really, it did, 2 steps forward, 10 steps back, so to speak. But I do feel now we've recovered well, and we're developing some great links with players, and I'm super excited in where we're going with it.
It's the voice of Sportiii Analytics founder Mike James. He's here with myself and Craig Viner. You're listening to Baseline Exchanges, a podcast from Baseline Media. We'll be chatting more with Mike about his work in tennis analytics in just a little bit.
Baseline Media adds colour and context to the stories behind sport. Our 3D rendered videos bring to life the stats and facts to give you vivid profiles of players, tournaments, key moments in history, and major discussion points. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Baseline Media _. We're more than just a podcast. Baseline Media's 3D rendered videos bring the key stories behind sport vividly to life. Check us out on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Baseline Media _. You're listening to Baseline Exchanges, the tennis podcast from Baseline Media.
Welcome back to Baseline Exchanges. I've got Baseline Media Editor-in-Chief Craig Viner with me as ever, and we're joined this week by tennis analyst Mike James. Now, Mike, you touched on your work a lot there with Stan Wawrinka. You're now predominantly with the Serbian star Misha Kekmanovic. We mentioned won his first ATP title last year. So how have you helped him so far, and what's it been like? What sort of impact have you been able to have since coming on board with him?
Great question. I think obviously I'm going to answer it in a positive way. I came on board with them back end of 2019, and for me, Mira Havatan, the head coach, and Misha were very receptive to data and analytics. They're also they want to improve, they want to develop. And you've got to remember, he's born 99, so he's 22 years old this year. And if you look at the top 100 and the way it's going, the players, let's take Dominic Thiem, for example, he won his first Grand Slam at the age of 27. So the road is a lot longer now, and the players are not getting into their peak until around Dominic Thiem's age, 27, 28. And then after that, they've still got 6, 8, even 10 years, in the top 100. So they're well invested into developing his game all over from a physical point of view, mentally, and from a numbers point of view. We've really tried to look at his court position, get him playing closer to the baseline, dominating with the forehand more. Some of his serve patterns we've adapted and changed a little bit. But the reality is it's an ongoing process. So the player's development never just does this and goes upwards on a trajectory. It's up and down, up and down. And obviously, again, like last season was a broken season. We had a great start to the year. I was in Doha. He beat Joe Songa. That was his third best career win. Lost to Rublev in the semi-finals. Went on to beat Alex de Minaur in Acapulco. That was his second best career win, and then had a great match against Rafa. And he really was playing some great tennis and going in the right direction with the ranking. And then obviously, we know the pandemic hit. Then when he came back, it was great to see him win his first ATP 250 in Kitzbühel. And, again, we can't take that for granted. If you look at Dan Evans winning his first ATP Tour title at 30 years of age last week, Misha to pick up his first title at the age of 21, I think is a great boost for the team and himself. And I think now the goal is, okay, I think he's 42 in the rankings today. And how can we now move him into top 30, top 20, top 10? And that is a mountain to climb. So, the trend setting guys, are your Aliassims, your Rublevs, your Tsitsipas. How can Misha get to that level? And it's going to take some time, and it's 1% gains. It really is 1% gains. If you look at his age of birth, I think he's third in the world at 99. You have the 98 born Tsitsipas, Rublev already there. So, the next 1 to 3 years are going to be interesting for Misha's development.
And just to sort of bring it sort of relatively up to date, he lost to Adrian Manarino at the Australian Open. What is it that a coach will ask for after such a match like that? I mean, that was second round, wasn't it? I think. And
yes.
So what you got a Grand Slam defeat early on. What sort of things will be asked of you? Yeah.
So for me, I'll do a player report. So normally around about 10 pages of information I'll give with integrated video. I'll give positives and negatives, areas of focus, things to work on. And ultimately, that will go to Miro, the coach, and then it's up to him what he does with that information. So, he can take 80% of it on board, he can take 10% of it on board, but they want that information there because now he won in the doubles today with Casper Ruud, but his next tournament in South America is not for 10 days. So they have some practice court time. And this is where you can make those little subtle changes and differences in between. Obviously, when the player is winning a lot, the byproduct of that is you can't really get on the practice court. You're just maintaining your skills. So when you have a loss like this is the time to actually work hard on the practice court and take those 1% gains forward.
I think it's the second time, having played him twice, that he's lost to Manarino. But when does a sort of a losing record against a particular player start to come into your thinking when you're dealing, not with Misha particularly, but when does an opponent start playing on an analyst's mind? When does it start to become a mental block?
The next time off. If it's a mental block for me, there's a problem. But
for the player.
Yeah, I mean, 2-0. He's played him in quick succession within 3 months. He did some things better yesterday than the first match, but I think the next time we play him, it's going to be a different story. And I think it's, with some players, they have a great plan A and they stick with that, and that's it. Some players are more adaptable. With Manarino, he has a great plan A, but we need to find out and figure out how we fix that plan A and exploit that a little bit, because I feel if we get behind that plan A, then we're going to have some good matches. But ultimately, Adrian Manarino is not going to affect Misha's career to the point where he's going to, his money, his titles, and his his ranking. I mean, if you look at sort of, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, Murray, what's been crazy about those four players is they really have affected each other's careers. I don't know the numbers between how many losses they've had in Grand Slams, but all of them, I think, if it wasn't for the other 2 or 3, would have 30 or 40 Grand Slams. Whereas all the other guys on tour, one player is not going to affect you. Misha might not play Adrian Manarino for the whole year. He might not play him for 2 years. So it's one of those where we have a good amount of information after those 2 matches now. We're not going to worry about that too much. We're going to focus on his side of the net and move forwards.
Yeah, and of course that's something we touched on in our video on the GOAT debate, which you can see on our YouTube channel, Baseline Tennis. The fact that those legends of the game, they have sort of shaped each other, and I think that's an important point Mike made. That not only would they have won more Grand Slam titles, but they would have probably been different players without the others being involved as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that you're trying not to get bogged down in history. You want to take some of that on board, but you're always looking to the future. I think that's a really interesting thing that I want to explore, is actually that working relationship within a team. Obviously, you've previously mentioned that, obviously the player's head honcho, but you're dealing more directly with the coach, and the coach is choosing what to feed back to the player. Is that a case of they're wanting or seeking a lot of positive reinforcement that what they are doing on the training court is the right thing? Or how much of it are you given like a blank canvas and be like, can you help us with, give us anything that you've got?
In fact, every single time we've been back in October when the season finished, we had a lot of requests for the off-season work with players. We did some work with Kyle Edmund, Iga Swiatek, obviously Misha. And when the coaches come to us, often it is a blank canvas. They'll go, throw everything at us, present that back, and then we're going to take from that some of the stuff that we know we're already doing, and then some of it is going to be totally new to us. And honestly, I've been doing this now at this level for the last 3 years. Every time you see a light bulb moment with the coaches that they go, crikey, I've been, thinking that that's the case often, but I've not had any facts or video to back it up. And both with Kyle and with Iga, the coaches, showed the reports to the players and sat down with them and went through it as well. And I think that's very, very important to actually, have that working relationship. Of course, there's going to be certain players that are not receptive to that. And sometimes we get approached by coaches that they want it, but the players, they can't sell it to the players. So already I find in that situation, it's very tough to start that relationship. And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But for me, the first question I ask the coach is the player interested in this? Because the player often 9 times out of 10 is paying. And ultimately, when you deliver the information to the player and they're receptive to that, there's going to be some changes that are going to hopefully be positive.
It might sound a bit of a cliche, but are younger players more receptive to it than sort of more established names because they sort of just grown up around everything that they see on TV and stuff like that, and with Hawkeye?
That's amazing. Absolutely, yes. If you look at the players we're working with, they're born between 99 and 2001. For me, with the fact you've got the on-court coaching, all the WTA players coming on tour now, they've only ever known the on-court coaching on the regular tour. The guys that have played the next gen and done the ATP Cup, they're seeing technology brought into their matches now. Stan Wawrinka at 18, 19 didn't have any of that information, for him. So, and all of those players. So then this next generation, moving forwards, absolutely, they're more receptive to it. And obviously that bodes well from our point of view, because, the players are obviously getting younger, and we hope they're going to be more receptive to using our services.
And of course, for players, there's sort of the must-haves, aren't there, in their team? Obviously, their coach and strength and conditioning now plays a big part, and has done for 20, 30 years or more. But obviously, analytics, relatively recent arrival on the scene. And as you say, some players are receptive, some aren't. A couple of questions on it, really. Firstly, are you aware of how many similar people to you there are out there? So you know what the competition is like, as it were. And how competitive is it? Because, surely there's only so many players that you can work with, A, at any one time, and B, to sort of go round, if you like.
Two great questions. So the first one is, yes, there's competition. I think there's around about companies that are delivering what we're delivering, probably around half a dozen in the world. So not many, really, but it is a niche industry. There's only 100 men, 100 women, and maybe only 20 or 30 doubles teams that can afford this service. Regards to how many players have somebody that takes care of their analytics or stats, I think on the men's side, more than the female. I would say, if I had to have a good guess on the top 100 men, I'd say at least 30 or 40 of them have somebody that take care of this area. Now, I think that the levels of what they're dealing with, some players might have their second traveling coach just browsing Hawkeye reports and just giving a bit of feedback there. Some of the top guys use companies like ourselves, and then some of them have somebody that are interested in, video. I spoke with a couple of coaches back in October with players in the top 50, and both coaches said, yeah, we have somebody already. We're interested in working with you. We have somebody already. And I said, what are they doing for you? And one of the coaches replied, well, they're sending me the last shot of each point. And I said, okay, what else? Nothing else. So, that to me is so, we would do that with a junior player for some visualization. It's such a low level for a player that's earning a couple of million euros a year. That surprised me. So I think the level and the quality that's out there differs. And I also think, maybe we're going to come on to this, but the data in tennis is very fragmented. It's coming from all different areas. And often the reason why we get in service with a player is they want all of their data measured by the same, outlet, if you like, rather than looking at a Hawkeye report or an IBM report or any of the other companies that are out there. Sometimes they don't trust the data. So I've seen a couple of matches before where I've been watching the match and I've seen the official data providers information that have, I remember one female match in qualifying US Open that said, there's no winners played from either player in the match. And I watched the match and that wasn't true. There was over a dozen winners. So, so if the coaches lose trust in the data, that's obviously not good for the sport, but then at the same time for us, it gives us a job potentially.
I certainly think that's an advantage where someone like yourself and Sportiii have over these mass data companies that are probably using clever computer algorithms, or obviously Hawkeye do a lot of automated tracking themselves. So at least you have the ability to be able to say, I tagged this match, or I watched this match and I did this, and I can vouch for everything that I've done is correct. That's surely a massive advantage, especially like you say, the second that something's out of place, then the coach or player will lose trust in the process.
Yeah, it's accountability, isn't it? So we're accountable for that player's data. So, in that case, they've got somebody to speak to if they feel that something's off. But that for me is where tennis needs to sort of get a grip a little bit and pull everything together. And I know during the pandemic, there was this Tennis United front and ATP WTA working together. And I know in both the tours reports that they put out there, data was one of the subjects where they want to pull together. So hopefully, I think that's actually only a good thing from our point of view, that if the data is consistent, we can actually support players in a different way.
I know that from my experience working with Hawkeye for almost 4 years, that this is a massive field of untapped wealth almost. Hawkeye have been collecting ball tracking data and player tracking data for well over a decade. And the problem has always been how to use it. I'll tell you a little bit of a story. It's quite funny, actually. We went to present to players and coaches about about the wealth of data that we have and how we can use it to create these bespoke reports, thinking that we'd be welcomed with open arms. And actually, it was quite the opposite. Players and coaches were very disgruntled that big companies were trying to sell their data back to them, because there was this constant tug of war between, well, I hit that ball, so I own that data. And tournaments sort of said, well, actually, the data's ours because we paid for Hawkeye to collect it. And companies like Hawkeye were also the middleman within that. So I can certainly see the fractions in sort of the bureaucracy, and that's very difficult for players to utilize this kind of data. Is that something that you've experienced before, or again, an advantage that you have?
For me, the players and the coaches, they come to us because they want a face and a person that, like I said before, being accountable. But ultimately, again, it's the interpretation of the data. So, I've had coaches come to me in the players' lounge of a tournament with 10 Hawkeye reports they printed out, put them in front of me and say, can you tell me something about the next opponent? That's not the best way to do things by any means, but, it's the Hawkeye report is literally a report and it's not connected to the video. So I think that's something they're missing there. And I think the other thing is, again, it's the insights. It's double clicking down on the data. So just seeing my serve percentage or just my court position in isolation, where the dots connecting to, that's so important. And that's where we come in, basically.
We're more than just a podcast. Baseline Media's 3D rendered videos bring the key stories behind sport vividly to life. Check us out on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok and YouTube at @BaselineMedia_. This is Baseline Exchanges from Baseline Media.
Craig mentioned there, of course, that he worked for Hawkeye, and also hands up, Craig. You've also done some work with Mike as well, haven't you? What have you learned from working with the great man?
Yeah, I have. I've done ample amounts of tagging, and been fortunate enough to help him in small parts with some of the report creation, and it's been really, really interesting. I think Mike's already sort of touched on it, but I actually did sort of a mock presentation to Mike a while back. And the insight that he gave me was really useful, especially around the language that I was using. The likes of being overly critical. We always think that players want to know what they're doing wrong in order to improve, but Mike has already said that actually some positive reinforcement is just as important for confidence. You don't want to be handed a 30-page document or be shown a 5-minute video on all the stuff you're doing wrong. That's actually not really going to help. So balancing that out is important, but also using language like you're doing this wrong or you can do this better. It's not necessarily your place as an analyst to be saying that, especially with myself and Mike coming from coaching backgrounds. It's very easy to try and take on the role of the coach, whereas actually you need to remember that you're just there to show them data and actually, like Mike has also said, to double click down. So present layer one. These are the basics. These are the facts. Avoid of opinion. These are the facts. And then, but always have that preparation if the coach does ask, but why? You can answer that. And then once you answer that, layer number 3, double click down, but why again? And I think the other thing that Mike has taught me is that, we're working with players and coaches from all sorts of different generations. English probably isn't always their first language as well. So being able to simplify data is also very important, especially because, it's a phrase I think I taught you, Andrew, paralysis by analysis is something that's
it's a great phrase, and I know exactly what you mean by it as well. You can get overwhelmed with numbers and figures and things.
Yeah, but there is, especially in this generation, there's so much data out there. Actually, the job is sifting through a lot of that. And yeah, context is so important, and that is why people like Mike are so important for tennis.
I think
don't worry, Mike. We have to remind Craig about his language as well, but that's probably for a different reason. Craig mentioned the paralysis by analysis there. From your perspective, is there such a thing as too much information? Where does it become information overload? And what about is there a chance that data starts leading the coaching too much? It's the horse and cart kind of thing.
Absolutely. And that's a skill set of, first of all, myself or an analyst at Sportiii, to then go to the coach. And sometimes we do go direct to the player, don't get me wrong. Sometimes the coaches go, I've been working with the player for 3 years. I want a different voice to jump on here to back up what I've been saying. But it really just comes, when I have a meeting with a coach, often I'll have multiple meetings with a coach to get to know them and understand how they want things presented. And actually, it's in evolving situation as well. Sometimes they'll go, no, can you add a bit more here? Can you pull back a little bit on this? We don't need the information as much. We need more information. And Craig touched on a point now. I think as a coach, going back to when I worked with Claudio Pistolesi, I coached and travelled, at futures level and challenger level with a Japanese player from Thailand, Italy, Sweden, America, UK. You have to adapt to sharing a room with a Japanese player who is incredibly great with his timekeeping, incredibly tidy, very sort of straight to the point. Humor's different compared to, I'm going stereotypical here, but this is my findings. An Italian player that maybe timekeeping isn't as good. They're a little bit more, they want to eat later. All these different things you have to adapt to survive a little bit and mold yourself as a coach when you're with these different cultures. So actually, again, I've brought that into my analytics, so I could be sitting here with, a Croatian, Serbian, American, all these different people. And you have to very quickly go, what audience am I talking to here? So you've almost got like all of this area of data and everything I've collected and information I've got for you today. And then I've got to go, well, I've got to have the skill set to take the bits out here and then present it, my end, and give it to them. And then from their end, their skill is, well, how do they use that? And often I'm actually educating the coaches on what X, Y, and Z means, because, and I talk about over communicating with the coach, over communicating with the conditioning coach, because if I under communicate with them and send them an email with some information and maybe sort of a 1 minute WhatsApp voice note, things are going to literally get lost in translation, and then we're out of a job because things have been misconstrued, and then everything blows up because we're dealing with sensitive information here, and it's on the money that we've got to get things right. And if we get things right, there can be massive success, but also the opposite can happen as well.
I think that's where communication is so key, and you talk about cultural differences, and that's important also to how players interpret data. For example, there's so much ambiguity around what a forced or unforced error is. And I know that you obviously tag sort of players in, neutral or attacking defensive situations. So being able to have that one-to-one chat with the coach about, right, for this player that we're working with, let's interpret what an unforced backhand is for your player on this surface in this situation. And then they know with full confidence that when they're getting that report and they're seeing unforced errors, and they're higher than your traditional stats are for SAP or Hawkeye or Infosys or whatever, that you're interpreting it how they want it to be interpreted, right?
Absolutely. That's the skill set. Yeah. Ultimately, we're going to live and die by our insights and how we communicate with the support teams.
So I think Andrew mentioned earlier about, the set summaries and the first serve percentages and stuff like that. And it's a massive frustration with me being a tennis fan that actually when you're comparing two players at their set summary and commentators will be like, oh, well, that's where the match was won, so-and-so got 78% first serves, points won, and so-and-so didn't. And,
don't throw my industry under the bus, Craig. This is my livelihood here you're talking about.
But you make a good point about expected goals as well, and that's a stat that sort of football have brought in, and obviously Match of the Day use it, and that's the idea of taking a 2D analysis of, it's not just showing stats, but actually a bit more 3D and contextualizing stuff a bit more. Do you think that broadcast can do more to help people understand stats?
Absolutely. I think for me, Mark Petchey is the best analyst, by the way, on TV. I think Mark is absolutely brilliant at honing in, double clicking down on data, but also the way he speaks and how passionate he is, and how he speaks very clearly and simply to the audience at home, I think is amazing. I think some of the commentary get lost in the data, and they just go very, very simple, and they say if the first serve percentage was 78%, then that's the reason the player won, when the reality is getting the ball in It's how much you win and where you're putting the ball, and what happens after that is the important thing. I think what we also have to be careful with and look at in tennis is, and where the broadcasters could maybe do a little bit better, is not comparing Diego Schwartzman's data with John Isner's data. So, Diego Schwartzman and John Isner can play each other, and there's over a foot in height difference. But the reality is, if you're talking about Diego Schwartzman's winning percentage on serve and comparing it with John Isner's, you can't do that, because if they were playing any other sport, they wouldn't be in the same position. If they were in basketball, they wouldn't be in the same position. If they were in football, they wouldn't be in the same position. In tennis, in boxing, they wouldn't fight against each other. But in tennis, they're gonna compete against each other and share the ring. So I think that, for me, is where we could be a bit smarter and utilize, from a broadcast point of view, but also from an analyst point of view. I think, I don't sit there with Misha or Kyle Edmonds' coach Colin Beach or any other player and compare, Misha, who is 6 foot, with Riley Opelka. I'm not getting out a comparison video of that. I'm getting out something from Novak or Rublev, or someone with a physicality or game style that we can look at.
I think that's certainly where there's even stats can almost be misleading, and certainly when they start to get misinterpreted. And I think it's just important that people have this awareness. So I actually fondly remember a piece I did for Eurosport. We were at the US Open a few years back. We had Ivan Lendl coming on the set, and I created a piece around. He was obviously working with Zverev at the time, about his second serve data, and sort of I showed his ball toss and his ball placement on contact point, and we worked. We did loads of maths around it, worked out what was going on with Zverev, and we tried to present it to Ivan live on Eurosport. And the first words that came out his mouth were, "I don't like this." And I remember it's clear as day, because the producer looked at me and just shook his head and was like, this is not going to go down well. And then he reeled off a load of reasons why this data that we had presented with him was pointless. There was no context around, yes, he was missing lots of second serves, but how aggressive he was being, how far he was missing with them, at what point in the match was he missing these second serves? Were they long or in the net? How hard he was going for these second serves, and it can be misleading. And I think that players can also fall foul of overanalyzing.
And also, I'd just like to sort of jump off the back of Craig there, because again, it comes back to the football expected goals measurement, which tries to sort of contextualize chances rather than just shots on and shots off. And I know that they did a bit of a dig down into England's bowlers in sort of over a period of time. Sort of around the time of the 2005 Ashes, that sort of attack with Matthew Hoggard, Simon Jones, Stephen Harmison, Andrew Flintoff, and actually sort of worked out that although he was the less heralded, Matthew Hoggard was actually the most successful bowler during that period, because he was getting out batsmen who were not only had better averages, he wasn't getting out the tail, if you like, but they were also well set in their innings. It was when conditions weren't necessarily favourable for him, if you like. So understanding moments in time and understanding points in a match, that's got to be more important than just the numbers.
This is brilliant, because now what we're all doing, we're talking about insights. We're talking about actual stuff that's going to make a difference in sport with analytics. And going back to Lendl, Lendl was, I spoke with Ivan about this in Florida. He was the one that got the Analyst really heavily with Andy. So he wanted the data with Andy. So it's interesting there. He wasn't, he's not against data or information, but it's also like you said, Craig, he knew that there was some insights behind that weren't adding up, that he felt that weren't on the money. So, again, that's what it comes down to. It really does come down to how can you present the information and where is it going? Because you need to look at the history of the player and what they've done, but you need to also then try to predict, because that's the other thing with analytics. You want to be able to predict this player, they carry on like this, is going to be top 20. Is going to be top, and you can do that, but it does take a massive amount of data and effort and time to find this information out.
Just finally, Mike, obviously there has been a trajectory in data analytics, and there is a temptation, obviously, to look at the wealth of stats that we've got available at our fingertips now, both as consumers and, of course, the many more figures that you all have behind the scenes. And say, and you sort of borrow the phrase from the US Patents Office of about 100 years ago, saying, everything that could be invented has been invented. So is there a temptation to say, well, actually, we're saturated with figures, there's nowhere else to go? Or do you foresee, are there sort of limitations at the moment you'd like to break through? And is there somewhere for analytics to go from here?
Okay, great question. I'm very passionate about this as well, because everybody says to me, oh, everything's going to be automated in 3 or 4 years. Not everything. All it means is the basic information will be automated, and then we can add layers of insights on top of that. So I'm working with a couple of physical trainers at the moment, because Dartfish has created some player tracking information where you can look at you can measure the speed of the player, the deacceleration and acceleration of the player. And you can also overlay the catapult information within the match. So what I mean by that is, if the player's wearing a heart rate monitor, you can actually, this is only on the practice court at the moment, so you can say, okay, 30 or 4 all, the player's heart rate is this, their fatigue is this, and you can measure the accelerations and deaccelerations of movement linked from the strategy to the physical side of the game. Now, at the Next Gen finals, they allowed wearable technology as an option for players. I think only 2 of them took it up. Amisha was one of the 2 out of the 8 that took this up. So I think wearable technology will be the next thing to come into tennis. And then from an analyst point of view, if I've got the players' metrics from a physicality point of view, and I can overlay that from the match point of view, I'm going into, a big black hole here of information of where we go with the insights. So, for me, that's what I want to see. I think on-court coaching on the ATP side will become normal. I think maybe they go down the headset route. And I also think the information for the player to have on the court will become more normal. If it doesn't become, I'm not saying it's going to become every single week. I think what tennis could do is almost do a cricket situation where they have different forms of the game. So you could have like a next gen style tour where it's fast 4. You've got the next gen format going on, the singles court only with the technology, but you've got your traditional regular tour going on at the same time, because everybody's attention span is getting shorter. People want everything now. They want everything on demand. So I think tennis has to adapt going into the next 5 or 10 years like that. And that's, for me, how it will develop.
And Craig, we often sort of take a sort of a back seat with our conversation with guests and let them give their expert insights. But of course, you're a bit of an expert on this side as well. So I'm going to ask you the question: where do you see analytics going in the next, say, 5 or 10 years?
That's a great question. Put me in the hot seat now, Andrew. I certainly think that we are seeing an upward trend in there. I know that podcast is where the money is, and let's not forget that this is, it's an expensive field. Data collection on mass is an expensive thing to do. So I do think broadcasters will lead the way, and as long as they keep innovating and keep looking to push the data that they're showing, that will eventually have a trickle down effect. Without the likes of Hawkeye, we wouldn't be able to potentially have these kind of conversations. So I do think it will have a trickle down effect from the top down. I think that, like Mike suggested, there will be different forms of the game. I think that's inevitable. And I think that broadcasts need data to break up, a long format of a match, 5-hour match. They will always look to show something during the set break or a change of ends. There will always be that demand there. So I think it's a really positive steps are being made, and people like Mike and his company with Sportiii, and like you said, players getting younger and the younger generation that's coming through. I think it's only going to go one way. It's only going to be positive. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I certainly see like augmented reality and headsets and all those kinds of things being a thing, and coaches being able to have almost like wearable headsets where they can actually see data on court and actually get a completely immersed 3D experience to understand ball height, contact point, incoming trajectory, all those kinds of things. So a long answer to a long-winded question.
No, it's the future is coming, folks, and it's not far away. So thank you very much, Mike. Fascinating insights and the world of analytics, and something that Craig is very experienced in as well. Thanks for joining us, Mike. It's been a pleasure having you on Baseline Exchanges.
Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure to be here. Really enjoyed it, and you can find me on social media at Mike James Sports, or my website is www.sportii with 3 I's analytics.com.
And we'll have all those links as well on our social posts when the podcast, now the podcast has been released. Craig, thanks a lot for joining us again.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you so much for coming on. Real.
Thank you to our producer, Henry, as well. And of course, most of all, to you out there for listening. Don't forget to check out our videos on YouTube, Baseline Tennis. Follow us on social media. We're at Baseline Media _ on Twitter, TikTok and the like, Instagram as well. All of our previous podcasts can be found on your usual provider as well. This has been a Baseline Media production. I'm Andrew Rayburn. For myself and the rest of the team, it's bye for now.
You're listening to Baseline Exchanges, the tennis podcast from Baseline Media.